So well, as said, I'm going to, talk about the course design, and I'm going to practice. I'm going to showcase a scientific approach with named backwards approach. So the major goal of this session is, as said, first beginning with the course design, and basically I will discuss the difference between the standard design model, which traditionally we practice, its disadvantages, as well. I'm going to introduce the backwards design and the benefits of the backwards design. Then I'll be talking about the various active learning strategies, wherein I'm going to contrast between the traditional and active learning strategies and the key concepts about this active learning. And I also will showcase few active learning strategies which can be, practiced in the Indian classroom context as well. I'm also going to touch upon how to design an effective lesson or the session plan. So this is exactly what I'm going to cover for the next 1.5 hours. So to beginning with, so this is always I use whenever I start delivering something about the roles and responsibilities of a teacher. So here, when it comes to the higher education teacher or the faculty or the facilitator, so we are responsible for the curriculum. We are responsible for assessing. Of course, we need to be a professional. We also need to develop the relationship network among the faculty or the facilitator or the industry. We also need to plan a good teaching and learning strategies, and we also need to be part of the learners and their learning. So moving forward, as a teacher, always this is something we need to question ourselves, that when we go for a class, we need to first question that what do I already know? The next question says, what do I not know? And what would I like to know? As a teacher, when we are having answers about these three questions, definitely we can make our sessions effective, and we can have a good turnout of the students to our classrooms. As well, we need to understand the learners as well. So when we are offering a course, when we are teaching a course, we need to assess them. In the morning session, there was a discussion that, the assessment should happen while we teach. That yes, what do they know, feel, and learn? So that is what we say, that we need to understand the learners. Without understanding the learners, whatever we teach, it just becomes a overhead transmission. Then we need to have a plan that how can we engage, or I engage my students in a way that is meaningful for them, so that the audibility of the classroom will be very high and the students keep motivating, students keep learning in our session as well. We also need to have a plan for what are the most effective strategies to promote learning. In fact, if the learning is not happening effective in the classroom, definitely we have to change our teaching strategy. So we need to identify the most effective strategies so that we can maximize the learning within the classroom. These are, I know, the two important slides that as a teacher, each time we need to keep questioning ourselves so that we can make the learning more effective. So now, before I begin discussing about the course design, as the Professor Sai Baba discussed in the morning, the NEP says, no more affiliating universities. Every educational institution has to be an autonomous educational institution with their own vision, mission, offering the programs and the curriculum. Yes, when an institution becomes an autonomous institution, yes, they have to design their own curriculum. That's where designing the curriculum is a very important aspect these days for every teacher, as your institution might be an autonomous institution, or in the coming future, your institution is going to become an autonomous institution. So now when we are designing a curriculum, as if I talk in from the industry perspective, our client is our student. So before we begin designing the curriculum, we need to understand the learner. As we all know that we are handling the 21st century learner. And why I am stressing 21st century? There is a difference in their learning style. There is a difference in their expectation. when we compare with the 20th century learner. What are the major differences? The first is multiple multimedia sources. They are tech savvy, always I say. So they are technologically enabled. They have the technology available in their hands. They can get information in fraction of time. So they are capable of using the multimedia sources where the information is available for them in a minutes, in a seconds of time, the moment they require. And they're also capable of parallel processing and multitasking. So we can't expect them, doing one task and doing the other, in a sequential mode. They can do parallel things at the same time. They are capable of multitasking as well. They are enabled with pictures, videos, and sounds and a text as simple example in YouTube. Whatever the content we are talking about, whatever the context we are talking about, in seconds of time, they are able to browse it, they are able to get it on the YouTube and many other sources as well. And the 21st century student is much networked. So they're not isolated. They're not just connected to their class, but they are connected to the institution, to the other institutions, to the students of other countries as well. They know what is exactly happening in the subject, in the course, in the technology, in the domain that they are learning as well. These students are very much comfortable in virtual and real spaces. No more the assumption that the human touch is very much important in teaching place. Yes, they are very much comfortable with the virtual environment as well. They are so much comfortable in learning from MOOCs courses. If I talk about that much, as you could see that MOOCs, they can learn at their self pace. We can't, a MOOCs will never ask that, be at 9 o'clock in the classroom and be at, log in at 9 a.m. so that you will be learning. So it says that self-paced. When the learner is comfortable to learn, he can just get into logged in and he can start learning. So the students are more comfortable with this particular kind of learning. And we call this particular learning as personalized learning. And if you just traditionally understand the kind of learning that we are offering now is called as a generalized learning, wherein a class has, a brighter, a weaker, and an average student. But, we deliver in a common pace. Either the slow learner will be happy, or an average learner will be happy, or a bright learner will be happy. So we are failing to give the personalized learning, which the 21st century student is more comfortable to learn what they want, to learn at the time when they want. So that's what is the expectation of the 21st century learner. And as the last point says, learning is relevant, instantly useful and fun. So whenever they learn something, so they have a question, why is that I'm learning this concept? Am I going to use it or not? If I'm not going to use it in the future, in my career, so why am I learning is a question always there for the 21st century learner. So they should be clear that why are they learning that particular concept. So these are the major attributes or the characteristics of a 21st century learner. So keeping this in mind, so working for an autonomous institution, or we are working for an institution to become autonomous, we always will get an opportunity to design a course. So the course design is not a simple task. Mostly, again, as I said, in the world, there are huge number of educational institutions who are offering the same program. When we are asked to design a course, yes, the similar course may be they offered by many other institutions. And just the most common practice is happening is taking a syllabus or a course from set of universities and just, working on that and coming up with a course. So this is exactly the practice that is happening in designing the courses or the curriculums across the globe. But yes, so we need to understand before talking about designing the issues with the current curriculum. What are that? Yeah, someone please mute yourself. So now, what is the curriculum is? The curriculum provides the foundation for entry into the profession, as we all know that. Mostly the participants are from engineering colleges, where we have some programs, and the programs do offer a curriculum which we design, and a curriculum is
కోర్స్ అని
nothing but some
కొత్త
set
లక్ష్యం
of
కట్టాలా
courses or the collection of
13వ
courses.
వరుస నుండి లైఫ్ లాంగ్ అంటే 100 years దాకా వరుస లక్ష రిటర్న్ వచ్చు.
Someone please mute yourself, or the organizers kindly mute themselves. Yeah. So as I said, curriculum is a collection of courses, and the major challenge is failing to meet the credit hour requirement. This we could see that, when we get into the curriculums of various programs, we could see that, a 3-credit course, and it has some 40-45 hours, and there is a design of the course, and the faculty fails to cover because, faculty always complains that the syllabus is so lengthy. Sometimes the faculty complains the syllabus is very less. So there is always a mismatch between the credit hour requirements in the curriculums that are getting designed. The next challenge is graduates are not satisfied with the learning experience as well. So the curriculums are designed, the courses are designed, and they need to be implemented. Faculty go and teach, but the curriculums are not giving the rich learning experience for the graduates as well. The curriculums which are offered, the courses which are offered, and again the teachers are failing to assess them. So when again, we are all practicing OBE, every course has some outcomes, and we say that these are the outcomes which a graduate is going to attain at the end of the course. But when we just look into the kind of assessment that happens, we could see there will be a mismatch between the COs that are designed as well as the assessments that are in place. And there is also a failing to plan the sessions to meet the outcomes as well. So that's where, I also said I'm going to discuss about the session plan. The session plan is quite important because when we talk about course design, the other dimension is about its implementation. The implementation happens from the session plan. So these are the major issues with the curriculum design, and most of you can correlate with from your expertise as well. So now I look at the teachers as designers, as I'm going to talk about the course design. So when I say teachers as a designer, so what are the attributes a teacher need to hold? What is that the teacher need to focus for designing a course? Someone stop my presentation. Yeah. So as a teachers, as a designers, what is that we need to do? We need to craft our curriculum, and we have to design a course, and that particular course has to meet the program outcomes. As the speaker discussed yesterday, so we have the program outcomes, and from the program outcomes, we are going to come up with the course outcomes, and for which a course is going to be developed. So we need to offer a course, we need to design a course which is going to meet the program outcomes or the program specific outcomes. So for designing a course, what is that we need to do? First, we need to diagnose the student needs. So the program for which you are designing a course, first we need to understand the student needs. What is that the student has to learn to get placed, to acquire the skills required? So first we need to diagnose that, as well as the curriculum that which we are going to design has to guide us. So it should guide us in designing the curriculum, as well as it should enable us as a faculty, our students, and the parents to determine that the outcomes are achieved. So whatever the outcomes that we say, we need to ensure that all the outcomes are getting mapped into the courses. Then only that particular design is going to be an appropriate. So as a designer of education, we should be very much mindful about our audiences. So our audiences is nothing but the students. As most of us have an understanding of software industry, how the software industry has a focus on the client, we also need to have a focus on our audience, our client, that is the student. To get deeper into that, as we look at the designing profession, such as an architecture or an architect, or we talk about an engineering, so which is always the client centered. Similarly, here also, we need to think in that particular direction. So how those designings are very much effective because they are always the client specific. They will take into consideration, they exploit the various needs and expectations of the clients. Similarly here, we need to exploit, we need to get the feedback and the expectations from the student while we are designing the course. If we are not doing so, then we may not be designing the proper course. Say for example, if I have to offer a course on artificial intelligence and I have taken a benchmark of some university from say Sweden or Switzerland or from US, then the localization of that particular course is going to miss because my students at my place has a different expectations and the students at that university will have a different expectations. So we always, when we are designing a course, the course has to reach the student and has to take the student to the expert level in that particular course. So that's where the context and the contents and the mapping to the outcomes is very much important. As well, the localization of that particular course design is highly important. So now, what is the major focus in the 21st century? So the education systems are now primarily focusing on the student-centric systems. So here, whatever the practices we do, whatever the curriculum we design, whatever the activities we do, the all these are going to be focused on the student. So that's where the course design also should be the student-centric in place. So now, how we say that a curriculum or the course is effective? We say that it's not just the design, but it's assessment as well as the instructional design. All these three are the major components. So when we are designing a course, we also need to take into consideration the possible assessments. We also need to take into consideration the instructional design. Why all these three components are important? Say, for example, in the Indian context. So we have a classroom with typically 60 students. But if I talk about a US classroom where there will be max of 20-25 students. And when I talk about assessment, here the assessments will be done by some central body, whereas there the assessments will be taken care by the faculty themselves. So there is some constraints, there is some restrictions for a faculty member for assessment as well as for performing various active or interactive activities as the classroom capacity is of 60. So as a teacher, when you are designing a course, we need to keep the assessment model as well as the instructional design into the concentration. Say for that's where, if the assessment is not taken into consideration, in my earlier slide, I was talking about one of the issue of the curriculum design where the we are failing to assess the outcomes that are designed. So now for the course, there are some outcomes, but the outcomes can't be assessed because of a restrictive assessment model in place. So that's where instead of complaining, instead of saying that we can't do, when we are designing a course, when we are writing an outcomes, we need to take into consideration the possible assessment models as well as the possible the instructional activities or strategies. This is going to help us in designing an effective course as well, which is going to reach the student expectations. That's where when we are thinking a course, designing a course, just you know correlate it with designing a software. So this is going to help you in making that particular course more effective. So still moving forward, that is the teachers as the designers. So what further we look at? So, as I said, correlate with the software. So what the software developer does, he always tries to make it maximize the user friendliness and reduce the bugs so that we get the better results. As well, when we look at an architect, what is that we look at? The architect looks at the building codes, he looks at the budget of the customer and the neighborhood aesthetics. Like the way, when we design a curriculum, we also need to take into consideration the students as well as the local industry expectations. We need to look at the assessment models. We need to look at the kind of learning strategies that are possible. So that's where we can design a very effective course. So that's where you know the teacher as a designer is also similarly constrained. Yes, we are constrained with the systems in place. So taking those systems, we can't complain that I require something to offer this particular course. Right here, ultimately the loser is the student. We always need to take the constraints into consideration and design a course and a curriculum, and by which we are going to make it more effective and more learning for the students as well. We are not free to teach any topic we choose by any means. Yes, we always are bounded by the policies. Similarly here, in simple, the course always should be bounded by the program outcomes which are, you know, already, in place. So that's where, the mapping is ultimately important. As well, I already spoke about the localization of the content is very much important. The NEP is going to talk much about that. Always we see that even our students comes up with projects with the data set, say for US, for UK, they develop a project. So instead we always need to ask the students to use a data set of the local place, say from Hyderabad, say from India, and then whatever the work they come out of will create some impact on the local community. So that's where, while designing the course as well, the other parameters that need to be taken into consideration is the national, the state, the district, or the institutional standards that need to be taken into consideration while we design the course. So that's where the localization is another important aspect to move forward. Now, by looking at one university, one institution, we can't offer the same kind of the course here because we need to understand the students and the course has to reach the students. So that's where, we can come up with a student-centric curriculum. So now, the major sins of traditional design, most of you can correlate here. So again, the bigger challenge here is, there is a curriculum in place and there is a board of studies and which gets approved, someone designs, someone goes and teaches, and the one who teaches will experience the difficulty uh, from the mistakes done by the one who has designed. So now we have some strategies that which we can overcome. I'm going to discuss further. So now what are the major sins of traditional design? So the first is, yes, the curriculums that are getting upgraded, various regulations are in place, and the curriculums will keep a word that, our curriculum is more of hands-on, but the challenge is, yes, the curriculums are hands-on, but without minds on. So this is, a major saying across the globe. What is that happening here? So hands-on curriculum says it's an activity-oriented curricula. It's a practice-based curricula, but the activities that are designed or the practicals that are developed, they will not replace the theory concept. So now here, what is an activity? Always people say that, please convert your passive classroom into an active classroom. Converting a passive into active will require some active strategy there. But when we are using an activity to explain a concept, we need to ensure that the activity will completely replace the theory of the content. If it fails to completely replace the theory, then the students' learning will become incomplete and the students will not feel excited about that. So planning an activity which is really a replica for the theory content is an important skill, and we need to be very much careful about that. So this is one of the important disadvantage. Point says activity oriented curricula lacks an explicit focus on important ideas and appropriate evidence of learning, especially in the minds of learners. So yes, instead of a passive classroom, a faculty converts it into an active classroom, and the faculty does some activity, but it fails to create an impact on the students' learning. This is the biggest challenge. So here, what is that happening? Teacher thinks their job is merely to engage in the sense, yes, deliver. I went to my class, I delivered my concept. The classroom was so pin drop silence, and now they are just listening to me. But at the end, there is no questioning. And yes, my session is done and quite a calm classroom as well. The next important sin is the coverage. There is a famous quote. It says that if today is Wednesday, it must be Belgium. So yesterday there is some session, there is some learning that has been taken place, and there is some connectivity missing, but still that is left over. And today, as per the plan, the topic to be delivered is some X, so the faculty delivers some X concept. So this is another biggest challenge, because coverage. So we have some number of hours and we need to cover that particular syllabus in that particular time. So we run by timelines and we run by checkpoints. This is another sin or the disadvantage with the traditional design approach. So we need to overcome these sins, because we are designing the curriculum for the 21st century students who are the tech savvy students. So on the other side, yes, as discussed by the expert yesterday, so Indian NBA by AICTE, right? So they have adapted the Washington Accord model. So the Washington Accord says outcome-based education is a prime approach for offering a quality education. So as the Indian NBA has become a permanent member of Washington Accord, so Indian institutions started practicing outcome-based education, and this is not something new. It's more than a decade the institutions are practicing outcome-based education. So what outcome-based education says, in a nutshell, to say that it is a 360-degree slope, and which always talks about continuous improvement. Outcome-based education says no one is perfect, but there should be some improvement from the earlier practice. So let's plan something, implement something, measure its effectiveness, and then after getting that measure, recorrect your practice, again then implement, again then assess. So this should be a continuous regressive approach. So this is what exactly an outcome-based education says, and the whole strategy or approach lies around outcome. So we have program outcomes, we have course outcomes, we have session outcomes. So then this particular diagram on my slide will give you a complete pictorial representation of outcome-based education. Sorry. Yesterday, as the speaker was talking again, there is a vision, there is a mission, there is a PEO, there is a PLO, there is a CLO. And the other side, we look at a university or an institution which offers some set of programs, and every program have some set of courses. And every course has a syllabus, and a syllabus has a pedagogy, and the pedagogies will talk about the learning process and its assessment and how the continuous improvement happens. So from the learning outcomes to the learning activities to the assessment and getting the measure. So this particular diagram talks much about the OBE education. And yes, now whatever the course that we are designing for the 21st century, the courses should have a more emphasis on the outcome-based education. So moving forward, as I was speaking, the Indian education system has started focusing on student-centric system. So here we need to have an understanding the basic difference between the faculty-centric and the student-centric. What does a faculty-centric system does, and what exactly a student-centric system does? When you look at the teacher-centered system, so there the learning is controlled. Controlled in the sense, I go to a class with my session plan. I will tell to the students that today I'm going to deliver this, and I keep lecturing, and it's going to be passive, where the student participation will be very minimum, and I complete my session which I want to deliver within the time frame that is given to me, and I will come up. So this is what a teacher or the faculty centered approach. And I give some assessment as the regulation says, and I do some examination as the system says. This is what we call as teacher centered, where the teacher gives an announcement saying that tomorrow I'm going to discuss this, tomorrow I'm going to assess you on this. This is what called as a teacher centered approach, where the student expectations are not taken into consideration. Of course, some enthusiastic motive faculty might take into consideration, but again, still it remains minimum. But moving forward to a student-centered approach, where the passive classroom converts into an active classroom. In an active classroom, the teacher and the student both becomes the participants of the learning or of the knowledge sharing. And I always say one word, as the current day, the teachers and the students, the either side of the coin, the learning might go in either way. There is no doubt someday, sometimes we might come out of some conclusions, some summary from the student as well. Instead of ourselves giving a conclusion, this happens because of the student learning approach and when we start practicing the active learning practices. So when the student is getting involved in the learning, practicing the learning, so there will be some experience to the student. So if I do this, this is going to happen. If I do the vice versa, this is going to happen. Student will have a conclusion, student will have a comparison, and he'll have some reasoning to talk about. So there is will be some authentic learning as well. So when the student is getting involved in the learning in the discussion, so he will pay much attention when he has some doubt to be cleared, some concept to be cleared. So that's where we call it as authentic learning. On the other side, this student-centered learning approach is going to create a collaborative learning approach. So where there will be peer learning as well. So learning is not going to happen just from the faculty member, but the learning is going to happen between the students as well. So this is the expectation in the current day scenario, and NEP is more going to talk much about that. The NEP talks about autonomy for the student for the learning of their choice. So that's where whatever the courses that which we design, right? So they should be of student-centered approach only. So moving forward, so this is a slide which is going to talk about how exactly we design a course. So the standard course planning, how do we do? So when we are asked to design some course, so first we'll try to search for a textbook. Still, most systems says that when you are offering a course, we need to have a standard textbook available. So first we choose a textbook, and then we write the syllabus. So the textbook might have some 10 to 12 chapters. So from that, actually, we take some 5 to 6 chapters, or we take 2 textbooks, and from which we collectively take the content and we write the syllabus. And then what we do is we revise or we write the lectures, the lecture plan we prepare for that particular syllabus. And then, so we prepare some lecture handouts, right? The PowerPoint slides. If we are using ICTR, you write your lecture notes. Then what we do is we prepare exams or, the question papers, and the students will be assessed for the syllabus. This is what exactly the standard course planning, right? Somehow we are adding OBE to this. So what is that we do is, while writing this, after choosing the textbook, while writing the syllabus, before that we prepare a course outcome. And for that particular course outcome, the syllabus will be written and the else process is going to happen. This is exactly the standard course planning or the traditional course planning approach. But yes, so this approach is instructor centered as said. But yes, we need to go with a scientific approach, which we call it as a backwards approach, which is a student-centered approach. This is the most focused content of this particular session. what happens in the backwards design? So first, formulate the learning goals. Say, for example, if I'm how to offer artificial intelligence course, first what we need to do is we need to formulate the learning goals. We already have the program outcomes. We already have the program specific outcomes. So first, write the learning goals, right? The outcomes here, I say. I will also going to discuss about the difference between a goal, objective, and outcome. So first, why is that we want to offer some, content? So formulate the learning goals. So the outcomes first comes first. After that, so as I said, objectives. Yes, goals, objectives, and outcomes. So set the learning objectives. Then design assessments. So when your outcomes are in place, so we need to design the assessments first, the both formative and assessment. So because before designing, before implementing the or offering that particular course, the assessments need to be designed such that the assessments will measure the outcomes or the objectives that are in place. If the assessments are failing to measure the objectives or the outcomes, then those objectives can't be offered to the students as we are failing to assess them, because failing to measure the outcomes is failing to implement outcome-based education system. So we need to have the assessments, both formative and summative, in place. Then we need to, after assessments, we need to develop the learning activities. So whatever the outcomes that are in place, so now we have to design the activities. So whether we would like to have a lecture, whether we would like to have a role play model, or we'd like to have some jigsaw approach, whether we want to make it blended, giving some home assignment to the students and coming back and some giving some peer learning, like think, pair, share, a four corner method, etc. So we need to develop various kinds of the learning activities for the outcomes that are in place, for the assessments that are already designed. So these learning activities represent your syllabus actually. So this is how the backwards design work, and this is how a course has to be designed. So just now correlate or compare between the standard approach and the backwards design. In the standard approach, as already syllabus in place, implementation is done. Later, when we are asked to assess, we may fail to assess the outcomes. Here, we are failing to implement outcome-based education, and other side, when we are failing to assess, it is also failing, to assess the learning of the student, as well as, when we are failing to assess the learning, we may not know whether the student has learned or not as well. So clearing the course doesn't mean the learning, but clearing a course with an assessment which clearly maps to the outcomes, it will ensure the learning of that particular content of the course. So that's where the backwards design is an important scientific approach for designing a course. So from now, whenever you go for designing a course, please start practicing this model. So every institution will have a regulation, will have an assessment model in place. You know the constraints that you have. Keeping that in mind, from the program outcomes and from the program specific outcomes, formulate the goals first, then write your learning outcomes, then think of your formative and summative assessment as constraint, then you start your learning activities. From the learning activities, your syllabus should come in place. I will give a simple example. When you look at most course syllabuses, how do they look at? If I take about a course like artificial intelligence, and in the unit one, there will be a concept like heuristic techniques. Now the question comes, you know to what extent the heuristic techniques has to be delivered to the student, whether to the understand level, remember level, apply level, analyze level. There is no clarity here. And the most difficulty that we see here in the systems is that, yes, someone designed, someone teach, and someone gives a question paper. And now the designer expectation is to apply level, and the teacher expectation is to understand level, and the assessment or the person who gave the question paper, his expectation was to analyze level, and this is going to create a overall confusion for the learner when we are failing to implement a matured outcome-based education system in uh, uh, you know uh, the programs. So that's where there need to be a mapping, a correlation with the content to the outcomes, and that has to reach to the teacher, to the designer, to the learner, as well as to the assessor as well. So that's where outcomes can never be taken easier. And I also say that sometimes I experience that people do reverse engineering, so to make their curriculum as outcome based education or OBE enabled, there is already a curriculum in place, and for the particular curriculum people just add the course outcomes. Just adding course outcomes will never enable your curriculum as OBE, because there is already a traditional curriculum in place, syllabus in place, and for that you're just adding on outcomes that might look as OBA, but in implementation it might get failed. So that's where the backwards design, has to be, practiced. So as I said, this is a student-centered approach. So moving forward, how the course design process takes place, as already I explained this is the further explanation. So the learning goals and objectives, then the assessments, then the learning activities. This is how the design has to take place. So now further discussing about, so it says that the design should be backward and the delivery of the course should be forward. See here, this is a bit scientific. So how? So it says that how we design, we first we come up with outcomes, then we go with assessments, then with the learning activities. So then when we go deliver forward, so first there will be learning activities, the peer learning happens, then we do assess them, and after assessing, we get that results from that measures, we see that whether the learning outcomes are attained. So that's why design in the backward approach and deliver in the forward approach is what exactly going to happen. So what outcomes become, the criteria is the materials to be selected, the content to be delivered, to be outlined, instructional procedures to be developed, and the tests and examinations also need to be prepared well in advance. So it says that before you go to your class, before you begin your course as a teacher, already the materials, the content, the instructional procedures, the assessments, and the attainment threshold all should be in place. This is what exactly a true implementation of outcome-based education. So now I'm talking about learning activities, right? Course design and the backwards design, the learning activities plays an important role. How do we design the learning activities? So here, I try to correlate, because nowadays, most educational system says practice-based learning. So I say that theory and lab both in place, hands in hand. So how does the learning activities are planned? So the maturity of the learning activities, you can look at this particular slide. So quite interesting. You can see that the very lower level is giving a lecture or a demo. Moving forward is a cookbook lab. Further moving forward is going for a structured lab. Moving forward is a challenge lab. Moving further forward is a student directed inquiry. And the highest, the matured, learning activity is a student designed inquiry. So what does this say? So just look at each one. A lecture, a demo, what happens? Lots of this is actually happening. That's it. A professor is doing science and students watch, right? It's a passive classroom. Just the delivery takes place, and the participants just keep on watching and just listen and try to understand what the faculty is trying to deliver. Then moving forward, a cookbook lab. What is a cookbook lab? Here I can see an analogy. We all know that, many of us, will always try to cook something new. We always depend on a cooking book, and it gives a recipe and we try to cook. Just correlate this with your lab manuals, right? The lab manuals are nothing but the cookbooks, right? A lab manual with some set of experiments, and it gives an approach that how an experiment has to be performed, what input has to be given, what instructions to be followed, and what output we get. So this is what actually we call it as a cookbook lab. So students confirm know the results. Students know that if I do this experiment, these results are going to come. And this experiment has to be done like this. Just follow the guidelines blindly. This is what exactly the cookbook lab, of course, better than the lecture demo where at least the student is getting involved. And moving forward is a structured lab. So the structured lab says professor sets one procedure and the student reaches own conclusion based on evidence. So the faculty says this is an experiment and this has to be done like this. So giving some pseudocode and the student goes with that particular procedure and the faculty will not give a definite outcome. Student after following the procedure will come with a conclusion and he will come with a response of why that particular conclusion, why that particular outcome and why that particular evidence. We call it as a structured lab. Then comes the next maturity lab model. We call it as challenge lab. And here we says that it's very simple. The professor poses the problem, whereas the student will design and test the solution. So just a minute, please. Yeah. So in the challenge lab, what happens is the faculty will give an output or an outcome, and it's the student who has to, define the problem as well as approach to get that particular outcome. So this is what we call it as a challenge lab. Most hackathons does this, right? And next, the next maturity level, which says is student directed inquiry. What it says is the professor will select a topic, but the student will pose the question. So we say that, I'm talking about AI heuristic techniques. Then the student will come up saying that in the heuristic techniques, professor, we will have a practice of this. So how hill climbing is implemented. So how's, the, the other approaches are implemented. So that's where, the students will come up with their own set of questions for the topic. So here the students are motivated. So that's what we call, we call this model as a student directed inquiry. And further moving, the student design inquiry. Here, the student himself will select a topic. He will identify the problem, formulate the questions, design and carry out the experiments, wherein the faculty will just become a facilitator to answer the queries and to ensure the student, does that particular experiment and support whenever they require, they come up with any question. So this is how, the learning activities has to go in a matured model. So saying from the lecture to the cookbook to the structure lab to the challenge lab, student directed inquiry and the student design inquiry. No doubt we can't reach to the student design inquiry right now, but at least the systems, the academic systems or the curriculum systems has to transform at least from the lecture demo to the cookbook labs. Then in the latter revision has to go for a structure lab, latter revision has to go for a challenge lab, and further and further and further. This is how the learning activities has to be developed. Learning activities doesn't mean implementing a jigsaw, implementing a four corner method, or implementing a think pair share, but it talks about, using the strategy, involving in the student into that particular knowledge or the skill, development. So this is something, which makes more sense for the learning activities. So moving further, so this is something, right? You know, it says that, what happens with the learning activities. A simple, a comic I just came across. It says that before I came here, I was confused about this subject, but having listening to your lecture, I'm still confused, but at a higher level. So the lecture, instead of resolving, it has further, created confusion among the participants. So the learning activity should never, create such confusion among the students. The learning activity should be meticulously planned and should ensure in optimizing the maximizing or maximizing the student learning. So now, when I talk about active learning, what does it mean? That, I say that activating the lectures. What is activating lectures? So students involved in the learning in a very meaningful way. And this happens in a collaborative fashion, right? Of course, not a single student, but a student is going to collaborate with his peers, her peers, and understand from each other and not just from the faculty member. So that's where, we need to, activate the lectures. Now, there is something, a slide which talks about the purpose of laboratories in engineering education, right? Why, laboratories are there in the curriculum. So it says that, the laboratories helps in asking questions and defining problems. They help in carrying out the investigations that are raised during learning from the theory. They help in analyzing and interpreting the data that is moving to the analyzing level, using the mathematics and the computational thinking that is learned, develop some models, come up with innovative or the novel models, and develop explanations and design solutions, and engage in argument from the evidence. Yes, from the evidence, there can be some brainstorming that can take place, and finally, a conclusion can come, and finally, obtain that evaluating and communicating the information. So, in engineering, to go with the practice based learning, laboratories plays a vital role. And when you are designing the course, you should pay much emphasis on the laboratory design. So sometimes we see or we experience that there will be, a sync missing between the theory course and the practice course of the same, for the same course that I say. AI theory and AI lab, the experiments fail to match. So here we need to ensure that the experiments that which we design, the labs that which we design, so we need to ensure that the theory is, it maps to the theory. That's where in some universities, when we see that there will be a lab course, but there will be no defined syllabus for that. So they say that there is a 1 credit laboratory, but there will be no syllabus. The syllabus will be the experiments from the theory syllabus. That can be either defined by the faculty, that can be defined by the students and faculty together. That's what, I'm saying about the going for the further maturity models. So this is how even, now the institutions have started practicing. So that's where when we design a laboratory course, we should be very much focused, because they are the courses which help the students to get the evidences and the conclusions of their learning. So there is further explanation about the cookbook laboratory. I'm not going to discuss that, as already I discussed much about that. I'm just going to skip it. And for promoting the active learning, what is that we need to do here again? This slide talks about we need to ensure that the theory context is retained when you convert a theory concept into an activity. Every dimension of that particular theory has to be replaced. Otherwise, that activity will become incomplete and it gives an incomplete learning. So that's where, we need to ensure that the activity completely replace the textbook theory. So now, yes, the outcome-based education revolves around goals, objectives, and outcomes. And there is a confusion among most faculty members as well. Sometimes for a course, for a training program, or for something learning activity, sometimes we see a goal, sometimes we see objective, sometimes we see outcome. How are they different? This particular diagram gives you more meaningful information. So goal is very broader. So objective is bit narrow and outcome is well focused here. So what is a goal? So in simple, goal is nothing but, if I say that the goal may be, clearing artificial intelligence course is a goal. But how the student clears is never mentioned. The goal is at any cost, the graduate has to clear the artificial intelligence course. That's a goal. That's it. So not much, clearly defined. So further to get in, so this gives an understanding. Goal is broader, objective is narrow when compared to your goal, and outcome is more focused. So that's where, I always say, sometimes I come across some curriculums where they write course objectives and course outcomes. Actually, when outcomes more focused is available, it's not at all required to write objectives and goals. Just writing outcomes is just sufficient. But of course, the outcomes comes from objectives and objective comes from the broader goal, right? So it says, what's the difference to understand goals? A simple example, clear communication is a goal. But how do we achieve the clear communication? What is the approach? Nothing is mentioned. Problem solving skills is a goal. But how do we achieve is never mentioned. That's a goal. But whereas coming to the objectives, so the objectives are further categorized, but I do not want to get into them. So they can be a cognitive, affective, or we call it as a behavioral as well, or we call it as a psychomotor objectives as well. What does this says? So it says that what the graduates would like to know, what the graduates really care about it, and what the graduates want to be. So this is exactly about an objective. But remember, the objectives are not specifically measurable. We say them, but we never talk about measuring objectives. We say that yes, this is what the expectation is. So that's what objectives are all about. But whereas coming to an outcome, so which my session talks about, so what is the learning outcome and what exactly it consists of? And sometimes people look at the learning outcomes and someone says, randomly this outcome is not good. Someone says this outcome is good. But here I would like to say that how and when an outcome will be effective. Every outcome statement should consist of three components to make that particular outcome effective. The first component is an action word or an action verb, we call it as. So we call apply, understand, analyze, evaluate, explain, list, define. All these are called as action word or action verb. So these action verbs comes from the Bloom's taxonomy. So that the level of learning that has to takes place. So if you want to do it at apply level, use an apply level action verb. If you want to deliver the context at analyze level, use an analyze level action verb. So action verbs. Then that particular outcome should have a learning statement. So the earlier goal says clear communication skills. So the clear communication skills is a learning statement. Following an action verb, every outcome should and must consist of a learning statement. That is the topic that they have to learn. And after that, of course, most outcomes looks with an action verb and learning statement, and most outcomes will miss an important aspect and outcome which makes it effective and which we call it as a criteria. Criteria in the sense which says that, so yes, we want the student uh, to get a clear communication skills, right, to implement them. But the criteria in what context, you want the student to perform the clear communication skills in the business perspective, you want them in the academic perspective, you want them in the scientific perspective, because clear communication means where the domain is never mentioned, where exactly the clear communication skills has to be performed. So whether it is workplace, whether it is his learning place, so that criteria must be mentioned. And when an outcome has an action verb, when an outcome has a learning statement, when an outcome has a proper criteria mentioned, then that particular outcome can be clearly measured. As I'm talking about, the bigger difference between a learning outcome and a learning objective is a learning outcome is measurable, clearly measurable. And the whole outcome based education system depends on measuring the outcomes that are designed. Once the outcomes are properly measured, then we can get a conclusion or analysis of the quality of the education. If this we are getting failed, then we fail to assess the quality of the education, then we fail to get the feedback on the system or the education, the pedagogies, and the student learning in place. So that's where the outcome is, the core of the OBE system. And that's where, as a faculty, when you are designing the courses, while you are writing your course outcomes, while you are writing your session outcomes, you need to ensure that your outcomes contains an action verb, your outcomes contains a learning statement, your outcomes contains a criteria as well. And here, if you just look at the program outcomes which are defined by the AICTE at the NBA, you look at every outcome is at apply level. So when you look at the Blooms, we all know that the Blooms has the levels, say, remembering, understanding, applying, and analyzing, evaluating, and creating. And the program outcomes are defined at apply level, which indicates our learning activities should at least be at apply level. Of course, based on the student quality, based on the diversity or heterogeneity of the students. You might go up to understand level to reach the students and pull them to the apply or evaluate level, but never include any learnings which talk about remembering in the in your course or in your curriculum. Never give questions or never give learning activities which talks about write a short notes on, define, list, such are ruled out. At least your learning, your assessment has to be at has to be at apply level to some extent. For one or two questions, one or two topics, you can go down to understand level to reach the students, and yes, to create a higher expectations and effectiveness of their learning, and going beyond your syllabus as well. You can further get into the analyze level questions also. So that's where, while designing outcomes, never design an outcome at remember level. Never use a remember level action verb. Your action verb, yes, for one outcome can be an understand, but again, this is not a thumb rule, please. As per POs, at least it has to begin at apply level, but of course you can go one at understand level and rest few at apply and analyze level. Sometimes when we look at some course outcomes, we see that there will be a course outcome too, which says that you know um, it says that yeah, apply some X principle. The next outcome says apply some Y principle. So these two will become a single outcome actually. Both are using apply, that is X statement, and this is Y statement. If X and Y can be broadly categorized into some Z topic, you can write apply Z. Or if can't be done, you can say apply X and Y. That becomes a one learning statement. So this is something again we experience when we look at course outcomes. So that's where when you are writing learning outcomes, ensure that the action verb is at least at apply level, and it has a learning statement and a criteria. Never put the same action verb for the two outcomes for a single course. In that case, the two learning outcomes can be merged together into one single outcome as well. So moving further, a simple example further to understand, right? This is an example always I give for, because people across, any domain can easily understand. See here, there is an outcome which says that the first one says write a research paper. This is an outcome, looks fine and comfortable for everyone, but this is an incomplete outcome. This is not an effective outcome. Look at the second outcome, which says that write a research paper in appropriate scientific style. Of course, this looks complete, but still, you know, uh, I say this is incomplete because the criteria is missing. So if you look at the third outcome, you see that write a research paper in appropriate scientific style at the end of the research work. So now you can see the completeness of the outcome, and that makes it clear for us how and when we can measure the appropriate scientific style of writing a research paper by the graduate. So this is how, so a research as an outcome should have an action verb, a learning statement, as well as a criteria, which makes the outcome more and more effective. And when it becomes effective, we can measure it. We can measure that particular outcome. So moving forward, just to understand, what happens when we fail to write the proper outcome. Look at this example. So there is an outcome which says the participants will develop an appreciation of cultural diversity in the workplace. For some course, some learning, this outcome is written. Now, how do we measure that? Just think of. So there is an ambiguity here. Assessor fails to develop an assessment for this particular outcome because here, this outcome is actually incomplete. So just look at down how this particular outcome is rewritten. Look at that. Participants will summarize in writing their feelings about cultural diversity in the workplace. So there is a learning statement, but the criteria is missing. But in the below statement, you can say they are able to summarize how in writing their feelings. So when it is mentioned, summarize in writing, so this makes the assessor clear about preparing an assessment model to assess that particular outcome. So that's why while writing the course outcomes, please keep the examination process in view to ensure that they are measurable. This is something additional which already I discussed, right? So look at, if sometimes we offer a programming course, and because of our restricted examination system, most faculty says that, I'm failing, I teach programs, but I fail to, assess the programs. Of course, the programs can be assessed when you have a practical, but of course, here you need to lock, not instead of programs, you need to assess them on the code snippets. So this is how our pseudocodes. So that's where, your assessment should focus, right? The examination process, the constrained examination process, and that's where accordingly even the outcome should be prepared, and it should have an action verb, learning statement, and the criteria in place. Hope with this particular example, and you might get an understanding how an outcome should be written and what exactly an outcome should consist of. And please understand, these outcomes are derived from the program outcomes. So here I do not want to deep dive into that, but there is you know uh, a missing in the understanding of the POs by most of the faculty members. That is, PO1 to PO5 are called as the dependent POs. PO1 to PO5, among the PO12s, the PO1 to PO5 are called as dependent POs, and PO6 to PO12 are called as independent POs. So it says that, for a student to go for PO5, so he need to have an understanding of PO4. For PO4, he need to have an understanding of PO3. So it's vice versa. Of course, it is inclusive. I call it as an inclusive actually. So unless the PO1 is achieved, PO2 will never. Unless PO2, PO3 will never. Unless PO3, PO4 never. And unless PO4, PO5 will never. But from PO6 to PO12, there are independent POs in place actually, right? So this is something, again, you need to understand. Okay, so few learning activities which can be practiced in Indian classroom context. So I say a quick write. There is a 3-to-1 approach. There is a think, pair, share. These are not the one which I developed or I designed. Mostly available on internet. You can search on internet and you can start practicing them wherever feasible or applicable in converting in your passive classroom into an active classroom, wherein this activity converts your theory into practice, theory into activity. So here again, few of these learning strategies can be are few assessment strategies are also in place. I'll give an example of muddiest point, which regularly I practice actually, and wherein at the end of my class, what I do is I'll ask the students to take a piece of paper and I'll ask them that please write the concept that is not clear from the topic that I delivered that day. So people do write, and after I come back, I just look at the slips. Uh, what my understanding says is most of the time, maximum students will write the same concept. So the next day when I go for the session, first before I start delivering the session for the day, I'll clear that particular muddiest point for them. This is a simple strategy that can be done, and wherein the last 2 minutes while you are taking the attendance, you can use that particular time as well, right? So there are many such active learning techniques available which you can practice and make the things make your class active, and where the students can keep participating. So now, after understanding the course design process and after understanding writing and outcomes, now let's look at how do we implement our learning strategies. So for that, what is that we need to write? We need to prepare a session plan. As we all know that, the moment when the course is allocated to us, definitely the head or the coordinator will ask you to submit a session plan. They will ask you to submit a lesson plan. So generally, people prepare the lesson plan. So here we need to understand one important point, that lesson plan is never for ourselves. Lesson plan is for others. Please understand this. Whether the lesson plan is in place or not, as a teacher, we have our plan and we will execute it. But the lesson plan or the session plan should always be prepared so that the others understand. Who understand? The learner understands that yes, tomorrow this is going to happen, and this is the session outcome, and these are the materials. This is how the session is going to happen. The minute to minute track are the materials required. Everything the learner will come to know. So that's why please prepare the lesson plan by keeping the learner into your view, not just keeping yourself into the view. So what does a lesson plan consist of? Here, the lesson plan means I'm talking about a micro session plan or a micro lesson plan. what it should consist of. It should consist of a background info. It should consist of an understanding goals, nothing but we call it as the session outcomes. It should consist of the materials required. It should consist of the starting activities, some structuring, flow and order, and refining. So here, while preparing a session plan, we need to keep one point in mind, that to how much time we can, you know, get the audibility of a student. So mostly the sessions are 50 minutes and 1 hour. Audibility doesn't mean that voice. I mean to say, we can get the control of the student for what exactly we are delivering. Today, in this distracted world, in this technology world, for a very effective communicator, it looks surprising, but it says max 2 minutes. We can control a listener for a max of 2 minutes of time. And just understand, as a teachers, we go to deliver, right, for 50 minutes to 1 hour. So how do we control them? How do we engage them? How do we get the audibility of the class? This is possible only when you start switching your class from the teacher-centric mode to the student-centric mode, moving back again to the teacher-centric mode. The classroom has to get switched. Say for the initial 5 minutes to 10 minutes, give the background information, kick off your session, and then give it 10 minutes for some peer activity to the students, then take back and summarize it or elaborate it, then move back to the students, let them give some analysis on that, then get back, conclude, and do an in-class assessment. This is exactly how the session has to be planned and implemented for maximizing the learning for the distracted students in place. So what does it say? I quickly wrap through, because I'm running short of time, because I need to take some questions as well. So first, background information, which says that what exactly we want to talk about, and what are the prerequisite topics for the particular session which we are planning, that exactly need to be mentioned in the background info. Then we need to write session outcomes. So for a course, we write 5 to 6 outcomes, but here for a session, you can write max 1 or 2 outcomes. And again, here also the outcome should have action verb, learning statement, and criteria in place. We need to write uh, uh, the outcomes, right? Here he is mentioning about goals. You can write a goal, objective, or an outcome, but outcomes are measurable. Always prefer to go for using outcomes. So then use the materials that you require. So now say tomorrow you're going to do an active class, and student need to have some drawing sheets. Sometimes student need to have a tab. Student need to have a laptop. We have to tell them well in advance. So your various activities requires various kinds of learning materials. Sometimes they have to carry the textbook to the class if you want like to have an open book assessment. The materials we have to mention well enough, and then we need to mention starting, how you are going to start your session, what are the activities that are going to be the part of your session, and then you have to structure them, the whole 50 minutes, and then give them the flow and order of your session. So this how a session plan has to be prepared, which will be in line to that particular OBE. So please understand over here, a complete OBE says that the design, implementation, and assessment. If we fail in one, the OBE implementation gets failed. If the design is improper and implementation is proper, the student learning will be in ambiguity, in confusion. So all the three aspects of this particular OBE has to be taken care for implementing the OBE system effectively. And when we does this, we are offering a quality education. Otherwise, failing to measure is failing to measure the quality. So this is how the session plans are prepared. And so this is some thinking cave. I have in slide. I actually skipped it, and I'm skipping this as well. I end my session over here, and my last statement says that as a faculty, always give or create an opportunity for the students to think. So make them participate in the learning. So never offer passive sessions as well. This is a statement which always we need to think about. That is, spoon feeding is in the long run will help the learners in learning about the shape of the spoon, but nothing else, right? So with this, I just end my session over here.